why is it better to pull from a non-retirement taxable account than a IRA, so an individual retirement account?
Okay, so let's assume what we call the buckets of money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we got as taxable accounts. People call them individual accounts, brokerage accounts, TOD accounts, trust accounts, right? A lot of different names. But basically, in that taxable account, when you make changes, you have to report them on your tax return. They could be taxable, pays dividend or interest, that ends up in your tax return. An IRA, on the other hand, you only pay taxes on it when you withdraw. You can make changes without having to report them. Dividends and interest are deferred until later. You basically only pay when you withdraw. And so one of the things that you have to figure out is, where do I get my money from? What is the sequence of withdrawals? Where do I go first? Where do I go next? And where do I go after that, right? So really, it should be take money from taxable accounts first, tax-deferred accounts like an IRA, 401k second, and tax-free accounts like a Roth last. So when we go through that lineage, though, there are some criteria and some things to think about. That's the simple version and answer.
Yeah.
But you don't particularly want to run all of your taxable accounts, because that would include your bank accounts, your checking savings, to zero before you start going to your IRA, because you are going to have some need for an emergency buffer. So you kind of say, okay, I'm not going to go below that, right? And so I'll make this up. Let's say I've got $100,000 and of total assets in taxable accounts. I don't want to get below 50. At 50, I'm okay, but below that, I get nervous. So that means I can spend the other 50 first, right? And the reason that you go to the taxable accounts first is because of taxation. The capital gains tax, if held on for more than a year, is lower than ordinary income tax, right? So that's great. And there's a chance that some of the money you have in there, you've already paid taxes on.
Yep.
So when you pull that out, it's essentially tax-free.
Yeah,
right?
returning of your capital is always tax-free.
Right. Because you only get taxed once in that scenario. So whereas when you withdraw from that IRA, it is every nickel, for most part, unless there's some weird things going on with after-tax dollars. But for most people, it's all tax-deferred. And when they pull money out, the whole amount that they pull out is taxable. And it's taxable at ordinary income rates, which are higher than long-term capital gain rates, right?
Yeah.
So that's the main issue as far as that goes, in terms of where to pull the money from, kind of first, second, or third. And that's why we look at that. The other criteria, though, that I would say, besides having an amount for an emergency buffer that you don't want to run below, sometimes people have some really good assets in those taxable accounts that are doing fantastic. And so let's say you worked at some company and it's just going and going and going and going, right? And, should you really be running that down to zero just because of taxation, giving up this fortune that you could have if it continued to grow like that? There is a certain amount that you should be careful of letting something like that dominate your life, because any company can fall apart. GE fell 90% from high to low. If that can happen to GE, really, it can happen to any company at some point in time. You have to be a little bit careful. But I would be much more in tune with trying to keep a majority of that, and maybe just kind of pruning little bits and pieces off. And so let's just say, for example, I've got $1 million in this taxable, of which 900,000 is this one stock, and it's doing great. I mean, it's a good company. It's really solid. The market seems to like it in general. It does better than the market over time. And so I'm going to be looking at my IRAs sooner than I would, even though I have a lot of money in the taxable, because I'm not making as much money in my IRAs potentially as I am here. You can do some different things. If you really love that stock, you could sell some, here to live off of, buy some back in your IRA. You can kind of keep some of that same exposure that way. But generally speaking, we don't do that. It's just a matter of, now, do I want that to become $5 million? Or, is there some number where it gets too big? So and maybe I'm going to prune on that once it gets to that number. So that's the overall thought process with kind of taking money out of a taxable account versus an IRA account. We start with the taxable account. There are some caveats as to how far we go with that, but that's where you want to start, and it works. It makes a lot of sense once you really think about it.